The motion was titled with devastating simplicity, Petition for the Full and Final Reconciliation of Accounts. It was a document of breathtaking audacity. It did not seek to dismiss the Cathar's claim. It sought to fulfill it, but on terms so literal, so absolute, that it would turn their entire legal philosophy inside out. The sharpest weapons are forged in the enemy's fire. You're arguing that their rescue was the first act of predatory collection, Jin summarized, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief, and that under their own contumacy mandate the cost of that collection must be borne by them. Precisely, Thorne confirmed, a rare wolfish grin touching his lips. They established the precedent in this very chamber. A creditor is responsible for their own collection costs. We are simply applying that precedent to the root of the transaction. The 70-year-old service was the Cathar writing an invoice and simultaneously demanding payment. It was never a gift. It was a hostile takeover initiated with a particle beam. Rostova's gaze was fixed on the tactical plot where the Cathar fleet still lingered at the edge of the system, a silent, brooding promise of future trouble. It's not enough to win the argument, Aris. We have to close the book, for good. She turned to the glowing avatar of the fleet mind. Solon, are the mirror arrays calibrated? Can you guarantee the precision of the energy transfer? The resonant energy casters are synchronized and calibrated to within 0.01% of the calculated expenditure, the AI replied. The transfer will be a mirror image of the energy signature they themselves logged 70 years ago. It will be, in effect, a perfect and undeniable refund. A law is a lever. You need only find the fulcrum. A new civilian feed from Viridia showed the governor addressing a packed assembly. The initial euphoria had faded, replaced by a weary anxiety. The Terran fleet has bought us time, she said, her voice heavy. But the Cathar have deep coffers. They can afford to wait. They are attacking our off-world trade partners, freezing our assets, filing 1,000 legal challenges. They mean to starve us into submission. Our fight for survival has moved from the battlefield to the bank. The governor's words were prophetic. Over the next several days, the Cathar's economic assault began in earnest. Viridia's primary off-world foodstuff contracts were suddenly cancelled by suppliers citing unforeseen logistical issues. Their lines of credit were frozen by banking clans citing new risk assessments. On the Terran side, Rostova began to feel the pressure from her own command. The mission's operational budget was being stretched to the breaking point by the Cathar's procedural deluge. Every motion they filed required a counterfiling, every challenge an expensive legal review. They were being buried in paperwork, and every page had a price. The slowest bleed is the deepest. They are trying to make our presence here too expensive to maintain, Jin reported during a briefing, gesturing to a chart that showed a steep upward curve of mission expenditures. At this rate, Fleet Command will recall us within 3 weeks. Then we have less than 3 weeks, Rostova stated calmly. She had anticipated this. She had factored it into her final desperate gambit. It was time. Councillor Thorne informed the arbiters we are ready to present our final motion. The virtual inquiry chamber reconvened. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The Cathar orator's avatar seemed larger, more imposing, its crimson robes radiating a smug confidence. It clearly believed the Terrans were on the verge of collapse, ready to beg for a settlement. It believed it had won the war of attrition. It understood the price of everything and the value of nothing. Thorne's avatar took the center of the platform. He did not look like a man on the verge of defeat. He looked serene, almost academic. Members of the Quorum Orator, he began. We have reviewed the Cathar's contumacy mandate. We have considered their core legal principle that all costs must be accounted for and all debts must be paid, and we find ourselves in complete agreement. A murmur went through the assembled avatars. The orator's posture stiffened. This was not the opening statement it had expected. "We do not dispute the energy expenditure 70 years ago," Thorne continued smoothly. "We do not dispute that an action was taken. We dispute only its classification. It was not a service. It was, as the Dominion's recent actions have proven, a collection action." He paused, letting the words sink in. The Cathar did not save a potential partner. They entrapped a future debtor. They were not rendering aid. They were issuing a loan by force at an interest rate of their own choosing. He turned to face the orator directly. "And as you yourself have established, the costs of collection are the burden of the creditor. Therefore, Viridia owes you nothing for the original event. In fact, you owe them for 70 years of compound interest on a debt they never agreed to." It was a perfect jujitsu, using the enemy's weight against itself. The orator's resonant voice was sharp with contempt, an amusing but meaningless semantic game. The debt is real. The expenditure was real. You cannot erase reality with clever words. "We agree," Thorne said, "which is why we will not use words." He gestured, and a new file appeared before the arbiters. "The petition for the full and final reconciliation of accounts. We are not here to argue. We are here to close the ledger. We propose to settle this matter once and for all, not with credits or legal precedents, but with the original currency of the transaction energy." The lead arbiter's crystalline form seemed to lean forward, its light patterns flickering with interest. "Explain your motion, Counselor." The Cathar claimed to have spent a precise amount of energy to shield Viridia Thorne, said, his voice ringing with clarity. "A cost they have borne for 70 years. Viridia, and by extension, the Terran Confederation, wishes to relieve them of this terrible burden. We are going to pay them back. In full. Right now. A debt. Paid is a debt erased." Before the orator could formulate a response, Rostova gave her order. "Solon, execute." On the bridge of the Lex Talionis, the lights dimmed as immense power was shunted from the main reactor to the ship's dorsal mirror arrays. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the deck plates, a sound of immense controlled power being brought to bear. Outside, the massive parabolic mirrors unfolded from the ship's spine, their polished surfaces catching the light of the distant star like a dozen silver eyes opening to the void. In the virtual chamber, Solon's calm, synthesized voice spoke. "The Terran command ship Lex Talionis is now accessing the public record of the Cathar Dominion's energy expenditure 73 standard years ago. The total is calculated at 4.2 exajoules. We are preparing to transfer that exact amount of energy back to the creditor." The orator was for the first time truly speechless. This was an unprecedented, unthinkable act. It was legal reasoning expressed through applied physics. It was a complete and total rejection of the Cathar's core philosophy. A gift from a superior could not be refused. A debt of gratitude could not be repaid with a cold, sterile transaction. It was an insult of the highest order, a rejection of the soul of their law. "This is unacceptable." The orator finally managed, its voice cracking with rage. "You cannot. The debt is one of gratitude, not energy. So you are the ones who put a price on it," Thorne retorted coldly. "You presented a bill. We are simply paying it, in the currency you first used." Aboard the Lex Talionis, Jin watched his console, his face a mask of tension. "Arrays are at full charge, Commander. We are painting the Cathar lead vessel with a targeting laser." "It's not a targeting laser," Lieutenant Rostova corrected him softly, her eyes on the view screen. "It's a delivery system. Open a ship-wide channel." I want every crew member to see this. A brilliant, pure, white beam of energy, utterly silent in the vacuum of space, lanced out from the Lex Talionis. It was not the violent, chaotic energy of a weapon, but a coherent, perfectly shaped stream of pure power. It struck the Cathar flagship, not with an explosion, but with a gentle, shimmering corona of light, as the vessel's shields automatically absorbed the incoming energy. It was a transfusion, not an attack. On the main screen, a data overlay showed the transfer in real time. The numbers ticked up with astonishing speed, 1 exajoule, 2-3. On the public inquiry record, a new entry appeared logged by Solon. It was a single line of text, time-stamped, and publicly verifiable. Payment rendered. Account closed. The entire transfer took less than 20 seconds. When it was over, the mirror arrays on the Lex Talionis glowed with a dull, cherry-red heat, and the ship's lights flickered as the reactor struggled to restabilize. A faint scent of ozone hung in the air on the bridge. The cost of the maneuver had been enormous, pushing the ship's power systems to their absolute limit. The price of justice is always paid up front. In the virtual chamber, there was only a stunned silence. The Terrans had not just argued their case. They had demonstrated it. They had performed a system-scale legal action that was both a perfect defense and a devastating counterattack. They had taken the abstract concept of a debt and physically, undeniably nullified it. The lead arbiter's form pulsed with a slow, deliberate light. The Terran Confederation has returned the principle of the contested service. The original claim of the Cathar Dominion is by the physical reality of this action rendered moot. This is a mockery of the law, the orator bellowed, its avatar flickering with digital instability. An abomination, we reject this payment. The gratitude tithe cannot be refused. It appears it can, the arbiter stated, its voice flat. Your own doctrines entered into this inquiry's record prioritize the balancing of ledgers. The Terrans have balanced this one irrevocably. The initial debt is erased. The arbiter paused. We will now consider the Terran counterclaim for damages resulting from the illegal blockade. True power is not in forcing payment, but in refusing the debt. This was the final blow. Not only had their primary claim been vaporized, but now the mirror ledger, their own hostile actions, was the only remaining matter for the court to consider. They had lost everything and were now poised to be handed a bill for their own aggression. On the bridge of the Lex Talionis, Jin let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Commander, their fleet. They are powering weapons again. This time it's for real. Rostova watched the tactical display. Red icons flared to life across the Cathar formation. The orator's final desperate gambit would be to abandon the pretense of law and resort to brute force. They would rather start a war than accept this public humiliation. Hold your fire, Rostova ordered, her voice like a chip of ice. Maintain our position. Do not raise shields. Commander, they will destroy us, Jin protested. Look at the quorum channel, she said quietly. On the diplomatic feed, the avatars of the other galactic powers, who had been silent observers until now, were suddenly active. One after another, they began to speak their voices, a rising chorus of condemnation directed at the Cathar. They had witnessed the entire proceeding. They had seen the Cathar's legal argument systematically dismantled. They had seen the Terran's audacious but peaceful resolution. And now they were seeing the Cathar respond to a legal defeat by threatening to open fire on an unarmed ship. A mask torn away reveals either a face or a monster. A new voice, heavy with the authority of the Galactic Core, addressed the Cathar orator. Your actions are noted. Any act of aggression against the Terran vessel will be considered an act of war against the Accord itself. Stand down your weapons. The inquiry is concluded. The threat was not from the small Terran fleet. It was from the entire galactic community. The Cathar were truly cornered now, not by weapons, but by the weight of their own exposed hypocrisy. Their reputation as a lawful, orderly power was in ashes. To open fire now would be to declare themselves nothing more than pirates and thugs. The red icons on the tactical display wavered. For a long, agonizing minute, the Cathar fleet hung on the brink of violence. Then, with a finality that felt like a physical blow, the weapon signatures vanished. The orator's avatar disappeared from the inquiry chamber without another word. A short time later, the Cathar fleet, silent and defeated, turned as one and warped out of the Viridia system. They left behind nothing but an echo of their arrogance and a gaping hole in their legal authority. The silence of a true defeat is the loudest sound in the universe. The cost of the victory was felt almost immediately. The Lex Talionis's power conduits were severely damaged, requiring a month of repairs at a starbase. It was a tangible wound, a reminder that their win had not been without price. The second cost was less tangible but far more significant. Rostova had not just defeated a Cathar legal claim. She had humiliated a galactic power on the public stage. The Cathar would never forgive it. She had made an enemy for life for her people, and her career would forever be defined by this one brilliant, dangerous act. A reckoning is not an end, but the beginning of a new kind of memory. The final ruling of the inquiry was a landmark. The Cathar's law of proactive assistance was declared a predatory doctrine incompatible with the principles of the Accord. All claims based upon it were nullified not just for Viridia, but for a dozen other worlds that had been suffering under similar tithes. The Terran counterclaim for damages was upheld, and a significant portion of Cathar assets in neutral territories were seized as payment. Rostova stood on the observation deck once more, looking down at the now free world of Viridia. The blockade was gone. The planet's lights twinkled with a renewed brilliance. Jin and Thorn stood with her, sharing in the quiet, exhausted triumph. The air on the bridge was clean again, the scent of ozone and imminent battle replaced by the sterile, familiar hum of a ship at peace. The public ledger entry blinked, confirmed on the main screen, its crisp digital text, a final monument to their victory. The mirror arrays of the Lex Talionis were slowly cooling the massive structures, contracting with faint metallic ticks that sounded like a clock marking the end of an era. They had won. They had held the line not with weapons, but with reason. They had faced a foe who believed law was a club, and they had shown them it could be a mirror, a perfect, unforgiving mirror that reflected not only the truth of their actions, but also the cost. Justice wasn't about erasing the crime, but about balancing the books so precisely that the debt could never be claimed again. It was the final, perfect receipt for a service that was never asked for, and a price that would never be paid. Justice is the final, perfectly balanced receipt. The finality of the moment, however, was a fragile illusion. As the celebration on Viridia began, and the crew of the Lex Talionis started to log the preliminary damage reports, a chilling notification scrolled across the top of the main tactical display. It was from a deep space listening post on the system's periphery, an automated sensor net that had been seeded generations ago. It was a single stark data point, a gravimetric anomaly signature, perfectly matching the mass of the departed Cathar fleet, now holding position in the system's Ort cloud. They hadn't fled. They had cloaked. A predator does not abandon its hunting ground. It simply finds a better shadow. Rostova's brief moment of relief evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. This wasn't an orderly withdrawal. It was a tactical repositioning. She turned from the observation window, her face a stone mask. "Jin, what's their status? Holding steady." "Commander," the lieutenant replied, his voice tight with renewed tension. "No energy signatures, no communications. They are just sitting there, waiting." Thorne, who had been reviewing the final inquiry transcript, looked up, his expression grim. "It's a protest. A non-violent, legally ambiguous act of defiance. They are complying with the letter of the ruling. They have ceased the blockade, but they are violating its spirit. Their presence is a threat, a constant lingering promise of future action." "They are waiting for the ratification," Solon's synthesized voice stated from the bridge speakers. The AI's avatar was not present, but its access to galactic diplomatic channels was instantaneous. "The Arbiter's ruling is a preliminary injunction. It must be ratified by a majority vote at the Accord Conclave to become binding interstellar precedent. The Cathar are not preparing for a new battle. They are preparing for the appeal." An echo is not a voice, but it can fill a room all the same. Rostova's stomach tightened. The conclave was a far larger, more political arena than the sterile, logic-driven inquiry. It was a place of ancient alliances, hidden agendas, and debts that were never recorded on any public ledger. They had won a battle of pure law. Now they had to win a war of influence and power. "They will argue the Arbiter overstepped his authority," Thorne mused, already gaming out the possibilities. "They'll claim our energy transfer was a hostile act, a violation of their sovereignty. They will paint themselves as the victims of Terran aggression and legal trickery. And they will have allies," Rostova finished. "Species with similar gratitude doctrines. Creditor empires who see this new precedent as a threat to their own business models." She began to pace the bridge, her mind racing. They were publicly humiliated. They won't just seek to overturn the verdict. They will seek to destroy the precedent and make an example of us. They need to prove that the ledger can never truly be balanced. The power of a chain is not its strength, but the belief that it cannot be broken. A civilian vignette from Viridia played on a side screen. The farmer Alara was back in her hydroponics bay. The nutrient shipments had arrived, and the conveyors were moving again. But she wasn't smiling. She was watching a news report about the Cathar fleet's reappearance at the system's edge. "It feels like the storm has passed, but the sky is still black," she said to the reporter. "You can't plant a new crop when you're not sure the sun is going to rise." Rostova made her decision. "Solon, what is the timeline for the ratification vote?" "The conclave convenes in 10 standard days," the AI replied. "Due to the public profile of this case, it has been placed on the priority docket." "Not enough time," Jin stated flatly. "We can't even reach the conclave's host system in 10 days, let alone prepare a new case." "We won't have to go to them," Rostova said, a new hard light in her eyes. "We'll bring the case to the entire galaxy. Thorne, that archaic law the Cathar used, the contumacy mandate. I want you to dig deeper. Find its origin. Find the legal philosophy it's built on. The Cathar are proud. Their laws are ancient. I guarantee you this isn't the first time they've done this. There must be a history. There must be other victims. A single crime is an anomaly. A pattern is a policy." Thorne nodded, understanding immediately. "If we can find other species who have been strong-armed by this same doctrine, we can file a class action appeal. We can turn this from a single dispute into a referendum on the Cathar's entire way of life." "It's more than that," Rostova countered. "The energy transfer. We treated their claim as a simple commercial debt and repaid it." The orator was horrified. Not just angry, but genuinely, philosophically offended. "Why, what did we violate?" "You violated the sanctity of the gift. Solon interjected. Analysis of the Cathar's cultural archives suggests their society is built on a complex hierarchical system of obligation. A gift from a superior to an inferior is not a transaction. It is a binding social contract that establishes a permanent power dynamic. By repaying the energy, you did not just clear a debt. You rejected their superiority. You declared yourselves their equals. There it was, the heart of the matter. This was never about credits or energy. It was about status. It was about a rigid cosmic order with the Cathar at the top benevolently bestowing their gifts on the lesser races who in turn owed them eternal fealty. The gratitude tithe was not a payment. It was a leash. And they had not just slipped the leash. They had melted it down and handed it back. The ultimate insult is not defiance but indifference. So our defense at the conclave isn't just about the blockade, Rostova said. It's about exposing the truth of their philosophy. It's about showing the galaxy that the gratitude tithe is a collar and the law of proactive assistance is just the hand that fastens it. She turned to her AI. Solon, begin a deep archive search. Cross-reference every known Cathar intervention with subsequent trade agreements. Look for patterns of economic subjugation. We need evidence. We need receipts. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. While the engineering crews worked around the clock to repair the Lex Talionis' ravaged power systems, Thorn and Solon plunged into a labyrinth of ancient legal codes and economic histories. Jin, meanwhile, was tasked with a delicate, dangerous mission. He was to take the ship's fastest long-range shuttle, the Swift Messenger, and make a covert run to a nearby neutral system. His goal to find a representative of the Xylons, a reclusive species that had had a mysterious, near-catastrophic encounter with the Cathar a century ago, after which they had severed all diplomatic ties and retreated into isolation. They had seen the true face of the law. Rostova knew she was racing against a clock that was being controlled by her enemy. The Cathar would be using these 10 days to whip up support, to call in favors to frame the narrative. She could feel their influence spreading through the diplomatic channels, a subtle poison of rumor and misinformation. Reports began to surface of Terran aggression, of a reckless commander who fired a weaponized energy beam at a peaceful fleet. They were twisting the truth, recasting their defeat as an unprovoked assault. Her own superiors at Fleet Command were growing nervous. The political capital she had gained from her initial victory was rapidly eroding. She was being questioned, second-guessed. The mission to repair the ship was being slow-walked by bureaucratic delays, a sure sign that political support was wavering. She was on her own. A commander's greatest burden is the silence of their allies. 3 days before the conclave was set to convene, Jin made contact. His message was heavily encrypted, transmitted in a tight beam burst. He had found the Xylons. They were willing to talk, but only under conditions of extreme secrecy. They were terrified of Cathar retaliation. Rostova took the call in her private chambers. The Xylon emissary appeared on her screen, a being of shimmering crystalline facets that shifted and reformed as it spoke its voice, a series of soft, melodic chimes. It told a story that was chillingly familiar. A planetary threat, a meteor swarm in their case. A timely, unrequested intervention by a passing Cathar fleet. And then the invoice. The gratitude tithe. We refused, the Xylon chimed, its facets turning a dull, sorrowful gray. We argued as you did. We called their law a fiction. What happened? Rostova asked, her voice barely a whisper. They did not blockade us, the Xylon replied. Their methods were more elegant. They invoked a deeper, older law. They called it the mirror of consequence. They did not demand payment from us. They demanded it from the star itself. The deepest debts are written in the language of physics. The emissary explained. The Cathar had returned to the Xylan system a year after their refusal. They brought with them a fleet of massive stellar collectors. They deployed them in a precise orbit around the Xylan sun, and for the next 5 years, they harvested a tithe of the star's energy. They didn't touch the planet. They simply dimmed the sun. The ecological devastation had been catastrophic. The Xylans had been broken. They had capitulated, signed a treaty of vassalage, and had been paying the Cathar in resources and technology ever since. Their isolation was not a choice. It was a prison sentence. A cold, sickening realization washed over Rostova. The energy transfer, her brilliant legal maneuver, had been a terrible, unwitting blasphemy. She hadn't just insulted their philosophy. She had mimicked their ultimate sanction. She had used their own sacred weapon against them. No wonder they were enraged. She had shown them the mirror of consequence, and they could not bear to look at their own reflection. A hypocrite hates nothing more than a perfect imitation of himself. The Xylan Treaty of Vassalage, Thorn said later, his voice heavy with disgust, as he reviewed the document Jin had transmitted. It's a slave contract. They were forced to sign over the patent rights to their crystalline data storage technology. It's the very technology the Cathar use for their most secure legal archives. Solan's avatar materialized its pillar of light, pulsing with a somber rhythm. The irony is significant. The Cathar built their legal empire on a foundation of stolen knowledge, extracted as payment for a service that was a prelude to extortion. Can we use this? Jin asked, his face hard. Can the Xylans testify? They are terrified, Rostova said. But they gave us the treaty. They gave us the proof. She looked at the document, at the elegant, flowing script of a broken people. This isn't just evidence. It's a confession. And we're going to read it to the entire galaxy. The truth once spoken cannot be unheard. The day of the conclave arrived. The Lex Talionis was still undergoing repairs, unable to move. Rostova and her team would attend virtually from the bridge of their wounded ship. It was a disadvantage. They would be a distant voice, a face on a screen, while the Cathar delegation stood in the grand chamber itself, radiating power and presence. The conclave chamber was a vast, glittering sphere filled with the avatars and physical representatives of 1,000 worlds. The Cathar orator stood on the central dais, its crimson robes a slash of defiant color in the cool blue light. It began its appeal, its resonant voice filling the chamber with a tale of Terran arrogance and violence. It painted Rostova as a rogue commander, a barbarian who answered a legal argument with a blast of raw power. It was a masterful performance full of righteous indignation and wounded pride. A lie boldly told becomes a kind of truth. When it was Thorn's turn to speak, the chamber was already murmuring the tide of opinion, clearly turning against them. He began calmly, methodically refuting the Cathar's claims, but his words seemed to be having little effect. He was just another lawyer splitting hairs, while the Cathar had told a simple, powerful story of victimhood. Then Thorn changed his approach. The Cathar speak of their ancient laws, he said, his voice rising in strength. Let us speak of them. Let us speak of the mirror of consequence. A ripple of shock went through the assembled delegates. It was a name spoken only in whispers, a dark legend of Cathar power. The orator's avatar went utterly still. The Dominion claims their law is about gratitude, Thorn declared, his voice ringing with passion. But we have found another example of their benevolence, a species known as the Xylans. He projected the Treaty of Vassalage into the center of the chamber. The elegant, damning script hung in the air for all to see. This is not a receipt for a service. This is a ransom note. This is the true face of the Cathar's law. It is the law of the shadow, the law of the dimmed sun. It is the law of the leash. When one chain is revealed, all the others become visible. He then played the recording of the Xylan emissary. The soft, chiming voice, filled with a century of pain, told the story of the dimmed sun. A wave of horror and outrage swept through the conclave. Species that had been on the verge of supporting the Cathar now looked at the orator with new suspicious eyes. The Cathar's carefully constructed image of benevolent stewardship was shattering. The orator, for its part, was radiating a fury that was almost palpable even through the virtual interface. The Xylan matter is a closed and private treaty. It has no bearing on this case. This is an illegal intrusion into the sovereign affairs of the Dominion. It has every bearing, Thorn shot back. It establishes a pattern of predatory behavior. It reveals that the gratitude tithe is not an end, but a means. It is the first step on a road that ends in vassalage and technological theft. Viridia was not the first. And if this conclave allows it, they will not be the last. Rostova watched from her bridge, her heart pounding. Thorn had done it. He had turned the tide. But she knew the Cathar would not be defeated so easily. A cornered empire does not plead for mercy. It seeks to burn down the court. An empire's final argument is always fire. The orator raised its hands, silencing the chamber. Its voice, when it spoke, was no longer resonant or philosophical. It was a blade of cold, hard diamond. The Terran commander speaks of mirrors. Let us show you a mirror. It gestured, and a new piece of evidence was submitted. It was a file that made Rostova's blood run cold. It was the complete, unredacted operational log of the TCS Lex Talionis. It included her private command logs, her communications with Fleet Command, even the psychological profiles of her crew. The Cathar's intelligence network was far deeper and more insidious than she had ever imagined. They had been watching her every move from the very beginning. Let the conclave see the mind of our accuser, the orator intoned. It highlighted a section of the log, her initial orders, which included contingency plans for a military strike if the blockade could not be lifted peacefully. She did not come to talk. She came prepared for the war. Her peaceful solution was nothing more than a last resort. It then highlighted her communications with Fleet Command, showing the dwindling political support. The budget overruns the pressure she was under. She acted not from principle, but from desperation. She engaged in a reckless, system-endangering energy transfer because she was about to be recalled in failure. This was not an act of justice. It was a gamble to save her own career. The most damaging truth is always the one taken out of context. It was a brilliant, vicious counterattack. They were putting her on trial. They were using her own diligence, her own struggles against her. They were turning her victory into an act of selfish ambition. She could feel the mood in the conclave shifting again, the cold tide of suspicion turning her way. This was their true power. Not fleets or ancient laws, but the ability to find the cracks in any hero's armor, to turn any victory into a stain. They were masters of character assassination, of twisting perception, until black became white. Rostova knew she had only one move left. She could not defend herself against these half-truths. To do so would be to mire herself in their game. She had to transcend it. She had to make this about something more than her or Viridia, or even the Cathar. She had to make it about the very meaning of the accord itself. She stood from her command chair, stepping forward, so her own image filled the view screen from the bridge of her ship. She was no longer just a remote observer. She was a commander on her station addressing the galaxy. The Cathar orator is correct, she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the silent chamber. I am a soldier. I was prepared for war. That is my duty. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the assembled faces. But I did not choose war. I chose the law. I chose to believe in this conclave, in the promise of the accord. I chose to believe that even the most powerful empire must answer to the truth. She gestured to the image of the Xylan Treaty. The Cathar have shown you my logs. Now look at theirs. Look at the long, dark ledger of their gratitude. They offer a choice: the collar of the tithe, or the darkness of the dimmed sun. That is not law. That is a threat. Today you are not just ratifying a verdict, she continued, her voice rising with a quiet, powerful intensity. You are making a choice. What kind of galaxy do we want to live in while ruled by the ledger of obligation, where the powerful bestow gifts that can never be repaid, or one governed by the ledger of justice, where debts can be settled, where accounts can be closed, where a mirror can be held up to an empire, and it can be forced to see its own reflection? A precedent is not just a ruling. It is a promise about the future. She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. My ship is damaged. My career may very well be over. That is the cost of my choice. Today, this conclave must decide what it is willing to pay. Choose the path of convenience, and you will legitimize the collar for 1,000 worlds. Choose the path of justice, and you will reaffirm the principle upon which this accord was founded, that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the final balanced receipt. She finished her words echoing in the vast, silent chamber. She had offered no defense for herself. She had offered only a choice. The raw, undeniable choice between two futures. The burden was no longer on her. It was on them. The lead arbiter, who had been silent throughout the appeal, now pulsed with a brilliant, decisive light. It turned to the Cathar orator. You have presented the Terran commander's logs as evidence of her character. The log also shows that her weaponized energy beam was calibrated to the exact energy of your original claim. A perfect repayment. Her desperate gamble was an act of precise, non-violent legal restitution. You have not proven her malice. You have only proven her precision. The arbiter then turned to the assembled delegates. The vote is now called. You will not be voting on the actions of a Terran commander. You will be voting on the legality of the mirror of consequence. You will be voting on the Xylan Treaty of Vassalage. You will be voting on the definition of a gift. The question is never who is right, but what is right. The voting began. Lights blinked across the vast sphere, each one representing the will of a star system. Green for ratification. Red for overturning. For a long, agonizing minute, the lights were a chaotic swirl of red and green. Then, slowly, inexorably, the tide turned. The testimony of the Xylans, the stark choice presented by Rostova, had cut through the politics and the lies. One by one, the red lights flickered and turned green. The final tally was overwhelming. The arbiter's decision was ratified. The Cathar's appeal was denied. The precedent was locked. The law of proactive assistance and all doctrines derived from it were now and forever illegal under the Galactic Accord. Privileges of the Cathar as a creditor empire were officially rescinded on the public record. The Cathar orator stood frozen for a moment, its grand legal empire crumbling around it. Then its avatar simply vanished without a word, without a gesture. On the tactical display aboard the Lex Talionis, the gravimetric signature of the Cathar fleet in the Oort cloud disappeared. This time for good. They had not just lost a case, they had lost the foundation of their power. Rostova finally allowed herself to sink back into her command chair, the tension of the last 10 days draining out of her in a single shuddering breath. The bridge was quiet, the only sound the soft, steady hum of the ship's systems. They had won. It was a victory that had cost them dearly, but it was real and it would last. The court beacon on the conclave's central spire cooled its judicial light, dimming now that its work was done. A final official entry scrolled onto the public ledger, visible to any being in the galaxy. It was a simple declarative sentence, a new law for a new age. I have faced the choice between the easy peace of the collar and the hard fight for the receipt. I have learned that true justice is not a gift you are given, but a debt you force the powerful to pay. They will hate you for it. They will try to break you for it. But the ledger, once balanced, sings a song of freedom that can never be silenced. The universe does not give receipts, so you must learn to become the ledger.